Jake Morrison woke up before the sun every morning for the past 15 years. The alarm clock on his knitstand read 4:30 in the morning, just like it always did. He rolled out of bed and pulled on his worn work boots, the same pair he had been wearing since he first arrived on New Montana. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Jake moved through his morning routine. He had built this ranch from nothing, starting with just a small prefab shelter and a few hundred cattle. The government transport ship had dropped him off here with basic supplies and a promise that more settlers would follow. That was 15 years ago, and Jake was still waiting for neighbors. New Montana was not an easy world to live on. The planet had two suns that made the days burning hot and the nights freezing cold. Most of the other settlers had given up within the first year and asked for transport back to Earth. Jake had stayed because he was too stubborn to quit. And because he had nowhere else to go, the nearest human settlement was 300 miles away across rough terrain. A supply ship came once a month to drop off food, medicine, and equipment. Jake had an emergency beacon that could call for help, but he had never used it. He preferred to solve his own problems. Jake walked outside and breathed in the cool morning air. The purple grass stretched out in all directions, broken only by the fences that marked his property. His cattle were good animals, bred tough enough to survive on this harsh world. They had adapted to eating the native plants and drinking from the underground springs that Jake had learned to find. The work was hard, but Jake liked it. He knew every inch of his 50,000 acres. He knew where the best grazing spots were, where the water was cleanest, and where the ground was too rocky for the cattle to walk safely. He had learned to read the weather patterns and could predict storms days before they hit. Jake started his daily routine by checking the perimeter fences. The native animals on New Montana were mostly harmless, but they were curious and sometimes tried to get at his cattle. He had built strong fences and maintained them carefully. A broken fence could mean losing cattle, and cattle were his livelihood. The water pump by the south pasture was making strange noises again. Jake had been meaning to fix it for a week, but there was always something else that needed attention. First, he walked over to the pump house and opened the control panel. The problem was obvious. One of the main bearings was wearing out and needed to be replaced. Jake had learned to be a mechanic, an electrician, a veterinarian, and a dozen other things during his years on the ranch. When you lived alone 300 miles from help, you had to be able to fix anything that broke. He had a workshop full of spare parts and tools, and he had gotten good at making repairs. As he worked on the pump, Jake noticed something unusual in the eastern sky. Dark shapes were moving against the pale pink dawn, too big to be the local flying creatures and moving too strangely to be aircraft. Jake had seen every kind of ship that came to New Montana, from the big transport vessels to the small courier craft that sometimes brought special deliveries. These shapes were different. They moved like living things with wings that beat in rhythm. But they were huge, much bigger than any bird or flying animal Jake had ever seen. He stopped working and watched them approach, feeling a mixture of curiosity and concern. As the shapes got closer, Jake realized they were not ships at all. They were creatures, but unlike anything he had ever seen. They had long necks and tails, powerful wings, and scales that caught the morning light. They looked like the dragons from old Earth stories, but real and alive and magnificent. There were 12 of them, flying in formation toward his ranch. Jake could see that they were tired, their wing beats labored and uneven. Some of them were much smaller than others, and Jake guessed those might be young ones. They were heading straight for his largest pasture, where most of his cattle were grazing. Jake ran back to the house and grabbed his rifle. He did not know if these creatures were dangerous, but he was not going to take chances. He had worked too hard building this ranch to lose it now. The rifle was a good one, powerful enough to stop most threats, but looking at the size of these creatures, Jake wondered if it would be enough. The dragons landed in his pasture with ground-shaking thuds. His cattle scattered in all directions, lowing with fear and confusion. Jake would have to spend hours rounding them up later, assuming he survived whatever was about to happen. The largest dragon was easily the size of a small aircraft. Its scales were a deep blue color that shifted to silver in the sunlight. Its eyes were large and intelligent, and Jake had the unsettling feeling that it was studying him just as carefully as he was studying it. The dragon took a step forward, moving with surprising grace for something so large. Jake raised his rifle, but something made him hesitate. The creature did not seem aggressive. Its posture was more like that of an animal asking for help than one preparing to attack. Then something impossible happened. Jake heard a voice in his head, clear and distinct, speaking words he could understand. "Human," the voice said, and Jake knew it was coming from the dragon. "We mean you no harm. We are travelers from far away, and we are very tired. We have been flying for many days, and we need a place to rest." Jake lowered his rifle slightly, but kept it ready. He had heard stories about telepathic aliens, but he had never expected to meet one. The voice in his head was calm and dignified, with a quality that reminded him of an old teacher he had once respected. "What are you?" Jake asked out loud, not sure if the creature could hear him or only speak into his mind. "We are the Vethys," the dragon replied. "We come from a world in the Crimson Nebula, far from here. Our home is gone, destroyed by enemies we could not fight. We are the last of our kind, and we seek shelter." Jake looked at the other dragons. They were all watching him with the same intelligent eyes, and he could sense their exhaustion and fear. Several of them had wounds, and their scales were scarred and dull. These were not conquerors or invaders. They were refugees. "You are asking me to hide you," Jake said. "We are asking for the chance to earn our place here," the dragon replied. "We do not expect charity. We have skills and knowledge that might be useful to you. We can work for our shelter." Jake thought about his options. 12 dragons on his ranch would be impossible to hide from the monthly supply drops. The colonial government would have questions and probably soldiers. But looking at these magnificent creatures, tired and wounded and far from home, Jake felt something he had not felt in years. He felt needed. "What kind of work can you do?" Jake asked. "We understand living things," the dragon said. "We can help your animals stay healthy and your plants grow strong. We can teach you things about this world that you do not know, and we can protect you from dangers that have not yet come." Jake made his decision. He had been alone for 15 years, and maybe it was time for that to change. He lowered his rifle and walked toward the dragons. "Welcome to the Morrison Ranch," he said. "Let me show you where you can rest." Jake led the dragons to the large barn where he stored equipment and hay. The building was big enough to shelter all 12 of them, and it would keep them hidden from anyone who might fly over the ranch. The dragons moved slowly, their exhaustion clear in every step they took. The largest dragon, who seemed to be their leader, settled down on the hay with a deep sigh. The others arranged themselves around the barn, with the smaller ones staying close to the adults. Jake could see now that some of them were badly hurt. Dark fluid leaked from wounds on their sides and wings, and their breathing was labored. "My name is Valorian," the large dragon said into Jake's mind. "I speak for our group. We are grateful for your kindness, but we must tell you the truth about why we are here." Jake pulled up a wooden crate and sat down facing the dragon. "I'm listening." "Our world was attacked by creatures we call the Harvesters," Valorian continued. "They are not like us or like you. They are machines that think and learn and grow. They came from the darkness between stars and consumed everything on our planet." Another dragon, smaller than Valorian but with intricate silver patterns on her blue scales, moved closer. "I am Zephyria," she said. "I was a keeper of knowledge on our world. The Harvesters do not just destroy. They take apart everything they find and use it to make more of themselves." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Are you saying they're coming here?" "We do not know," Zephyria replied, "but they follow patterns. They move from star to star, consuming worlds with life and intelligence. Your planet has both." The smallest dragon, barely the size of a large horse, crept forward. Her scales were brighter than the others, more green than blue, and her eyes held a curiosity that reminded Jake of a child. "My name is Ember," she said shyly. "I am the youngest. I have never seen a human before." Jake smiled at her. I've never seen a dragon before either. Any of you. Valorian shifted his great head to look at Jake more directly. We have heard stories about humans. Some say you are warriors who never give up. Others say you are builders who can make something from nothing. We hope both stories are true. Why? Jake asked. Because if the harvesters do come here, you will need both skills to survive, Zephyr said. They have destroyed 1,000 worlds. They learn from every battle and become stronger. But they have never fought humans before. Jake walked over to examine the wounded dragons more closely. The injuries looked serious, and he could see that some of them were infected. I need to help you heal first. Then we can worry about other problems. We heal differently than you do, Valorian said. But we would be grateful for any help. Jake had treated sick cattle for years, and he knew the basics of cleaning wounds and preventing infection. He fetched his medical supplies and began working on the dragon's injuries. The dark fluid that leaked from their wounds was not blood but something else, something that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the barn dot as he worked. The dragons told him more about their world and their people. They were not just animals with intelligence. They were scientists and artists, philosophers and builders. They had created beautiful cities and amazing technologies, all based on understanding how living things worked. We do not make machines. Like you do, Ember explained as Jake cleaned a cut on her wing. We grow things. We talk to plants and animals and ask them to help us. We can make trees that give light, or grass that cleans water, or animals that are stronger and smarter than they were before. That sounds like magic, Jake said. It is not magic, Sophia corrected gently. It is science. We have learned to work with life instead of against it. We can teach you, if you wish to learn. Jake thought about what that might mean. His ranch already pushed the limits of what was possible on New Montana. If the dragons could help him improve his cattle and crops, he might be able to do things he had never imagined. What would you want in return? He asked. A home, Valorian said simply. A place where we can live and work and remember our lost world. We do not ask for charity. We will earn our place here, Jake made his decision. Then you're welcome to stay, but I need to know what we're dealing with. Tell me more about these harvesters. Over the next few hours, the dragons painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything Jake had ever heard of. The harvesters were not a single species, but a collection of machines that had been growing and learning for thousands of years. They moved through space in great ships, landing on worlds with life and systematically taking them apart. They do not hate us, Valorian explained. They do not even understand us. To them, we are just another resource to be processed. They take our bodies apart to understand how we work, then use that knowledge to make themselves better. But they made a mistake with our world, Zephyr added. They expected us to fight like other species they had conquered. They expected us to use weapons and armies. Instead, we used our knowledge of life itself. Ember's eyes brightened as she remembered. The trees fought back, the grass became like knives. The very air became poison to their machines, but it was not enough. There were too many of them, and they learned too quickly. So you ran, Jake. Sad, it was not a question. We were sent away, Valorian corrected. The elders knew that our world was lost. They chose 12 of us to carry our knowledge to safety. We are teachers and healers, not warriors. Our job is to preserve what we can and find a new place for our people to grow. Jake stood up and looked around the barn at the 12 dragons. They were magnificent creatures, clearly intelligent and peaceful. But he was starting to understand that their arrival might bring danger to his quiet world. How long do we have? He asked. We do not know, Zephyr said. The harvesters move slowly between stars. It could be months or years before they come here. Or they might never come at all. But if they do come, Valorian said, this world will need to be ready. Your people fight bravely, but they fight with simple weapons against an enemy that adapts. To everything, you will need new ways of fighting. Jake thought about the colonial defense forces. They had a few patrol ships and some ground troops, but nothing that could handle the kind of threat the dragons described. If the harvesters were as powerful as they claimed, humanity would need every advantage it could get. Can you teach us? Jake asked. Can you show us how to fight the way you did? We can try, Zephyria said, but it will not be easy. Your people think in straight lines. You build machines to do work that living things could do better. You will need to learn to think differently. Ember hopped closer to Jake, her young voice excited. But humans are good at learning new things. That is what makes you special. You change faster than any other people we have heard about. Jake smiled at her enthusiasm. Well, I guess we'll find out how fast we can change. But first, you all need to rest and heal. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out how to make this work. As the dragons settled down for sleep, Jake walked back to his house. His quiet life was over, but maybe that was not such a bad thing. For the first time in years, he had a purpose beyond just surviving. He had a chance to be part of something bigger than himself. The stars were bright overhead, and Jake found himself wondering which one had been the dragon's home. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the harvesters were moving between worlds, consuming everything in their path. But here on New Montana, 12 dragons and one stubborn human farmer were about to start preparing for a war that might never come. Jake hoped it would never come. But if it did, he intended to be ready. Jake woke up the next morning to find Ember sitting outside his house, watching the sunrise with obvious fascination. The young dragon turned her head when she heard the door open, her green-tinted scales catching the early light. "Good morning, Jake," she said into his mind. "I hope you do not mind that I waited for you. I wanted to see how you do your work." Jake smiled and poured himself a cup of coffee. "You're welcome to watch, but it might be boring for you." "Nothing is boring when you are learning," Ember replied. "On my world, the young ones always watch the elders work. That is how we learn to understand living things." Jake walked toward the cattle pasture with Ember following close behind. The other dragons were still resting in the barn, but he could sense their presence through the strange mental connection they all seemed to share. It was like having voices in the back of his mind, quiet but always there. When they reached the pasture, Jake began his daily routine of checking on the cattle. He counted them to make sure none had wandered off during the night, looked for signs of illness or injury, and examined the grass to see where they should graze next. Ember watched everything with intense curiosity. "Your animals are healthy," she observed, "but they could be much stronger. The grass they eat is good, but it could be better." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. "Watch," Ember said. She walked over to a patch of the purple grass and placed her clawed hand on it. Jake felt a strange tingling in the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. The grass began to change, its color shifting from purple to a deeper violet, and its texture becoming thicker and more substantial. "I asked it to grow stronger," Ember explained. "Now it has more of the things your animals need to be healthy. The grass is happy to help because it knows the animals will spread its seeds farther." Jake knelt down and examined the changed grass. It looked different, more vibrant and alive. When one of his cattle wandered over to investigate, the animal immediately began eating the new grass with obvious pleasure. "This is incredible," Jake said. "How did you do that?" "All living things want to grow and be strong," Ember said. "We just learned how to talk to them and help them do what they already want to do. Would you like me to teach you?" Over the next few days, Jake learned things about his own ranch that amazed him. The dragons could sense things about the land, the water, and the animals that his human senses could never detect. They showed him underground streams he had never found, patches of soil that could grow crops he had never imagined, and ways to help his cattle become stronger and healthier. Sophia spent hours with Jake, teaching him the basics of what she called life speaking. "It is not magic," she explained patiently. "It is understanding. Every living thing has a pattern, a way it wants to grow. We learn to see these patterns and help them become stronger." Jake found that he had some natural ability for this strange science. He could not speak to plants and animals the way the dragons did, but he could sense their needs and help them in small ways. His cattle seemed calmer around him, and his crops grew faster under his care, but the most dramatic changes came from the dragons themselves. Valorian and the other adults began working on what they called preparing the land. They moved across the ranch at night, touching plants and animals, changing them in ways that Jake was only beginning to understand. "We are making your ranch into a fortress," Valorian explained when Jake asked what they were doing. "If the harvesters come, this place will be ready to fight back." Jake watched in fascination as ordinary grass became something that could move and respond to threats. Trees grew stronger and developed what looked like natural weapons. Even his cattle began to change, becoming larger and more intelligent, their eyes showing a new kind of awareness. "Will they still be my cattle?" Jake asked, worried about what was happening to his animals. "They will be better than your cattle," Ember said. "They will be your partners? They will understand danger and know how to avoid it. They will be able to help you in ways you never imagined." The transformation of the ranch was subtle but constant. During the day, everything looked normal. But at night, Jake could hear strange sounds and see mysterious lights moving across his property. The dragons were working, reshaping his world into something new. 3 weeks after the dragons arrived, Jake got his first real demonstration of what they had accomplished. He was working on a broken fence post when he heard a sound he had never heard before, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the ground itself. Valorian appeared beside him with startling speed. "Something approaches," the dragon said urgently. "Something that does not belong here." Jake looked up at the sky and saw a small object moving toward his ranch. It was sleek and metallic, clearly artificial, and it moved with a purposeful intent that made his skin crawl. The object was about the size of a small car, with no visible windows or doors. "Is that one of them?" Jake asked. "A harvester?" "Scout," Zephyr confirmed, landing beside them. "They send these ahead to study new worlds. It will examine everything here and report back to the main fleet." Jake felt a chill of fear. "How long before the fleet arrives?" "If it sends a positive report, perhaps 6 months," Valorian said. "We must not let it complete its mission." Jake expected the dragons to attack the scout probe, but instead they did something far more subtle. As the metallic object flew over the ranch, the land itself began to respond. The grass seemed to dim and fade, the trees became ordinary, and the cattle returned to their normal behavior. "We are hiding," Ember explained. "The scout will see only what we want it to see, a simple human farm with nothing interesting to report." The probe circled the ranch for several minutes, scanning everything with invisible sensors. Jake held his breath, wondering if their disguise would work. Finally, the object turned and flew away, disappearing into the distance. "Did it work?" Jake asked. "We will know soon," Valorian said. "If the scout was fooled, the harvesters will mark this world as low priority. If not ... Jake spent the next few days waiting anxiously for some sign of what the probe had reported. The dragons continued their work, but he could sense their tension. They were preparing for war, even while hoping it would not come. The answer came 2 weeks later. Jake was eating breakfast when every dragon on the ranch suddenly lifted their heads at the same time, their eyes wide with alarm. "What is it?" Jake asked. "Ships," Valorian said grimly. "Many ships. They are still far away, but they are coming toward this system." Jake felt his heart sink. "The harvesters?" "Yes," Zephyr confirmed. "The scout must have detected something that interested them. They are coming to investigate." Jake looked around his ranch, seeing it with new eyes. The ordinary-looking grass that could move and fight, the trees that were actually living weapons, the cattle that were becoming something more than animals. In just a few weeks, the dragons had turned his simple farm into something extraordinary. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. "Perhaps 4 months," Valorian said. "Maybe less." Jake thought about the colonial government, the defense forces, and the millions of people who had no idea what was coming. "We need to warn them." "We need to prepare." "Yes," Zephyr agreed. "But first, we need to decide if your people will accept help from us. Many species fear us because we are different. They would rather fight alone than trust dragons." Jake thought about that. He had spent 15 years alone on this ranch, trusting no one but himself. But the dragons had shown him that some things were bigger than individual pride or fear. They'll listen to me, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. I'll make them listen. Ember moved closer to Jake, her young voice hopeful. You really think your people will work with us? Jake looked at the young dragon, remembering his own loneliness and how much it had meant to find these unexpected companions. Ember, humans can be stubborn and suspicious. But when we're facing something that threatens everything we care about, we learn to work together, even with dragons. The preparations began in earnest the next day. Jake activated his emergency beacon for the first time in 15 years, sending a message that would bring the colonial government to his ranch. He did not know how they would react to finding 12 dragons living on his property, but he was about to find out. The war for New Montana was about to begin. The colonial government ships arrived 3 days after Jake sent his emergency signal. He watched from his porch as 2 military transports landed in his largest pasture, their engines kicking up clouds of purple dust. Soldiers in full combat. Gear poured out of the ships, weapons ready. Scanning for threats, Captain Lisa Grant was the first officer to approach the house. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her uniform was crisp and professional, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Mr. Morrison, she said, stopping a safe distance from the porch. We received your emergency signal? What's the nature of your problem? Jake took a deep breath. Captain, I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you with an open mind. The safety of this entire planet depends on it. Captain Grant's expression did not change. I'm listening. I have 12 refugees living on my ranch, Jake said. They're not human, but they're peaceful. They came here fleeing from an enemy that's now heading toward our system. The captain's hand moved closer to her. Weapon? What kind of refugees? Before Jake could answer, Valorian emerged from behind the barn. The great dragon moved slowly and deliberately, making no sudden movements that might alarm the soldiers. Even so, Jake heard several weapons being raised and safety catches being released. Hold your fire, Captain Grant ordered sharply. She stared at Valorian with wide eyes. What in the name of Earth is that thing? My name is Valorian, the dragon said, his mental voice reaching all the humans present. I am a refugee from the Crimson Nebula. We came here seeking shelter from an enemy that destroys worlds. Captain Grant stumbled backward, her hand on her weapon. It's talking in my head? They communicate telepathically, Jake explained quickly. They're not dangerous. They're scientists and teachers who escaped when their world was destroyed. Destroyed by what? The captain asked, though she kept her eyes on Valorian. Machines that call themselves harvesters, Valorian replied. They consume entire planets and use the materials to make more of themselves. They are coming to this system. Jake could see that Captain Grant was struggling to process this information. Her training had prepared her for many situations, but not for talking dragons and planet-eating machines. How do you know they're coming here? She asked. A scout probe visited this ranch 2 weeks ago, Jake said. The dragons detected it. The main fleet will arrive in less than 4 months. Captain Grant activated her communication device. Command. This is Grant. I need to speak to the governor immediately. We have a situation here that requires high-level decision-making. Over the next hour, Jake and the dragons explained everything to Captain Grant and her team. They told the story of the Harvester attack on the Dragon homeworld, the flight across space, and the recent scout probe. They demonstrated the biotechnology that had transformed the ranch, showing how ordinary plants and animals had become part of a living defense system. This is impossible, one of the soldiers muttered as he watched grass move in response to Ember's touch. 6 months ago, I would have agreed with you, Jake said. But I've learned that impossible things happen when you're fighting for survival. Captain. Grant was talking quietly into her communicator, reporting to her superiors. Jake could hear parts of the conversation, and it was clear that the people in charge were having trouble believing what they were hearing. Sir, I'm looking at a dragon the size of a transport ship, the captain said firmly. It's talking to me telepathically. Whatever you think about this situation, it's real. 2 hours later, Governor Patricia Wells arrived in a fast courier ship. She was a practical woman in her 60s who had spent her career dealing with the challenges of frontier worlds. But even she seemed overwhelmed by what she found at Jake's ranch. "Mr. Morrison," she said after greeting the dragons, "you've certainly made my job more complicated." "Governor, these dragons have knowledge that could save our planet," Jake said. "But we need to act fast. The harvesters will be here soon." "How do we know we can trust them?" Governor Wells asked. "For all we know, these creatures could be advanced scouts for the very enemy they claim to be fleeing from." Zephyria stepped forward, her silver patterns catching the afternoon light. "Governor Wells, we understand your suspicion. But consider this, if we wanted to harm your people, would we have spent weeks helping one farmer improve his ranch? Would we have hidden from the harvester scout instead of helping it?" "She has a point," Captain Grant admitted. "The changes they've made to this place are clearly defensive, and they seem genuinely afraid of these harvesters." Governor Wells walked around the ranch with Jake and several dragons, seeing the transformed landscape with her own eyes. She watched cattle that moved with new intelligence, touched trees that responded to her presence, and listened as Valorian explained how every living thing on the property had become part of an integrated defense system. "This is beyond anything our scientists have ever imagined," she said. "But can it actually stop an invasion fleet?" "Not by itself," Valorian admitted, "but it is a beginning. If we can teach your people to work with living systems instead of against them, if we can help your military adapt our biotechnology, you might have a chance." Governor Wells stopped walking and looked directly at Jake. "What do you recommend, Mr. Morrison? You've lived with these creatures for weeks. Do you trust them?" Jake thought about everything that had happened since the dragons arrived. They had healed from their wounds, shared their knowledge freely, and worked tirelessly to help him improve his ranch. Most importantly, they had become his friends. "Governor, I've lived alone for 15 years, Jake said. "I've learned to judge character pretty well, whether it's human or not. These dragons are good people who lost everything to an enemy they couldn't stop. They came here not to conquer, but to help us avoid the same fate. But can we work together?" Captain Grant asked. "Our technology is completely different from theirs. Our soldiers are trained for conventional warfare, not this biological approach." Ember, who had been listening quietly, spoke up with the enthusiasm of youth. "Humans learn faster than any species we have heard about. You adapt to new situations quickly. That is why we think you might succeed where others failed." Governor Wells made her decision. "Captain Grant, I want you to establish a joint command post here at the Morrison Ranch. We're going to run a pilot program combining human military tactics with dragon biotechnology. If it works, we'll expand it across the planet." "What about the Colonial Council?" Captain Grant asked. "They'll want to know about this." "Let me worry about the politicians," Governor Wells said. "You focus on preparing our defense. We have less than 4 months to get ready for a war unlike anything humanity has ever faced." Jake felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The government was taking the threat seriously, but he wondered if 4 months would be enough time to prepare. The harvesters had destroyed the dragon's advanced civilization. What hope did a frontier colony have against such an enemy? As if reading his thoughts, Valorian approached him. "You are worried," the dragon observed. "Shouldn't I be?" Jake replied. "You said these harvesters destroyed 1,000 worlds. Your people were more advanced than us, and they still lost." "True," Valorian said, "but they made one mistake. They underestimated the power of cooperation between different species. Each world they conquered fought alone, using only their own knowledge and abilities. And you think we can do better?" "I think humans have something the harvesters cannot understand," Valorian said. "You have hope in impossible situations. You refuse to surrender even when defeat seems certain. Combined with our knowledge of biological systems, that might be enough." Over the following days, the ranch became a hub of activity. Military engineers worked alongside dragons to understand how living systems could be weaponized. Soldiers trained with enhanced animals that could serve as scouts and fighters. Scientists studied samples of the biotechnology, trying to learn how it could be mass-produced. Jake found himself at the center of it all, serving as a translator between human and dragon ways of thinking. He had become something he never expected, a bridge between two very different species preparing for war. Captain Grant approached him one evening as he watched the sunset. "Mr. Morrison, I have to ask, do you ever regret activating that emergency beacon? Your quiet life is over." Jake thought about the question seriously. His ranch was now crowded with soldiers and scientists. His peaceful routine had been replaced by constant meetings and planning sessions. The simple life he had built was gone forever. "Captain," he said finally, "I came to this planet 15 years ago because I had nowhere else to go. I built this ranch because I needed something to do with my hands. But I never had a real purpose until those 12 dragons landed in my pasture." He looked toward the barn where his unlikely friends were resting. "Now I'm part of something bigger than just surviving. I'm helping to save a world. Maybe even more than one world," Captain Grant nodded. "I hope you're right, Mr. Morrison. Because if this doesn't work, there won't be any worlds left to save." The Harvester fleet arrived exactly when Valorian predicted they would. Jake stood on his porch in the early morning darkness, watching 12 massive ships block out the stars as they entered New Montana's atmosphere. Each ship was the size of a small city, their dark metal surfaces covered with thousands of smaller craft like insects swarming around a hive. "They're beautiful in a terrible way," Jake said to Ember, who had taken her usual place beside him. "Do not let their beauty fool you," the young dragon replied, her mental voice tight with old fear. "Inside those ships are machines that have consumed 1,000 worlds. They think only of taking apart and rebuilding." Captain Grant's voice crackled through Jake's communication device. "All units, this is command. The enemy has arrived. Begin defensive operations immediately." Jake looked across his ranch, seeing it with new eyes. 4 months of intense work had transformed not just his property but the entire planet. Working together, humans and dragons had created something that had never existed before, a world that could fight back. The grass beneath his feet was no longer simple vegetation. Each blade was connected to a vast network that could sense movement, detect chemical signatures, and respond to threats. The trees were living weapons that could launch projectiles or release defensive toxins. Even the air itself had been changed, filled with microscopic organisms that would attack any foreign technology. "Phase 1 begins now," Jake said into his communicator. "All stations report ready?" Around the planet, similar preparations were complete. Every major city, military base, and settlement had been transformed using dragon biotechnology. Humans had learned to work with living systems instead of fighting against them, and the results were extraordinary. The first Harvester landing craft touched down in Jake's largest pasture, the same place where the dragons had first landed months before. The craft was a perfect black sphere that split open like a flower, revealing dozens of spider-like machines that immediately began scanning their surroundings. "They're beautiful too," Ember observed as they watched the Harvester units spread out across the field. "But they are beautiful like death is beautiful, perfect, and empty." The Harvester machines moved with mechanical precision, taking samples of soil, plants, and air. They paid no attention to Jake's cattle, which grazed peacefully nearby. To the machines, the animals were just biological resources to be cataloged and processed later. One of the spider machines approached the barn where the dragons usually rested. It extended sensors toward the building, clearly detecting some form of life inside. What it found was Valorian, sitting calmly in the center of the barn floor. "Welcome to New Montana," the great dragon said, his mental voice reaching not just the machine but every dragon and human connected to their communication network. "We have been expecting you." The Harvester machine froze, clearly confused by this unexpected response. Its kind had encountered thousands of species, but none had ever welcomed them. "We are the Harvesters," the machine replied, its voice a cold, mechanical sound that somehow Jake could understand. We process biological and technological resources for integration into our collective. You will be processed. No, Valorian said simply. We will not. The machine moved forward, extending cutting tools that gleamed with deadly efficiency. But before it could reach Valorian, the barn itself came alive. The wooden walls sprouted thorny vines that wrapped around the machine's limbs. The floor became soft and sticky, trapping its legs. Even the air became thick and hard to move through. Impossible, the machine said, as it struggled against the living trap. Biological systems cannot be coordinated at this level. You are wrong, Valorian replied. You have never encountered a world where two intelligent species work together. You do not understand cooperation. All across the ranch, similar scenes were playing out. Harvester machines found themselves caught in traps that seemed to spring from nowhere. Grass that wrapped around their sensors, water that shorted out their circuits, and air that clogged their mechanical parts, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the harvesters adapted to these defenses, as they always did. Phase 2, Jake announced. Show them what humans can do. Captain Grant's enhanced soldiers emerged from hidden positions around the ranch. They moved with speed and grace that would have been impossible without dragon biotechnology. Their armor was living tissue that could repair itself and adapt to different threats. Their weapons fired projectiles that could change course in mid-flight and seek out specific targets. The battle was unlike anything in military history. Harvester machines that could adapt to energy weapons found themselves fighting opponents that changed tactics faster than they could process. Human soldiers worked with dragon partners, combining human unpredictability with dragon wisdom about living systems. Jake watched from his porch as one soldier named Pete Williams worked with a young dragon to trap a group of harvester units. The dragon would alter the ground beneath the machines while Pete attacked from unexpected angles, never using the same approach twice. They're learning, Ember observed as she watched the battle, but they're learning too slowly. The harvester machines were indeed adapting, but each adaptation took time, and time was something they had never lacked before. Previous battles had lasted days or weeks, giving them plenty of opportunity to study their enemies and develop countermeasures, but this battle was different. The defenders changed their tactics every few minutes, guided by dragon insight and human creativity. Just when the harvesters thought they understood how to fight the living landscape, the humans would try something completely new and unexpected. Phase 3, Jake announced as the sun reached its zenith. Teach them about human stubbornness. What happened next would have been impossible to explain to anyone who had not witnessed the months of preparation. Every living thing on the planet began to change at the same time. Plants that had been defensive became offensive. Animals that had been hiding joined the fight. Even the bacteria in the soil began attacking harvester technology. The harvester machines found themselves fighting an entire world that refused to be conquered. Every tree, every blade of grass, every insect had become part of a coordinated defense that adapted faster than their processing systems could handle. This is not possible, the lead harvester unit transmitted to its fleet. Biological systems do not coordinate at planetary scale. Human systems do, Jake said, speaking directly to the machine through the Dragon communication network. When we're fighting for our home, we all work together. The battle raged for 3 days. Harvester reinforcements landed repeatedly, but each wave found the defenses stronger and more coordinated than before. The machine's usual advantage of adaptation was neutralized by opponents who changed faster than they could learn. On the 3rd day, something unprecedented happened. The harvester fleet began to retreat. They're leaving, Captain Grant reported in amazement. All units are returning to their ships. Jake felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Is it over? For now, Valorian replied. But they will return, with different tactics. They do not forget, and they do not give up easily. Then we'll be ready for them, Jake said with determination. This planet knows how to fight now. As the harvester ships disappeared into space, Jake looked around his transformed world. His quiet ranch had become the center of a revolution in warfare. Humans and dragons had proven that cooperation could triumph over even the most advanced enemy. What happens now? Ember asked. Jake smiled at the young dragon, who had become like a daughter to him. Now we teach other worlds what we've learned. We share our knowledge so that no planet has to face the harvesters alone. Governor Wells approached the group, her face showing exhaustion but also pride. Mr. Morrison, what you've accomplished here will change everything. This planet has become a symbol of what's possible when different species work together. It started with 12 refugees asking for shelter, Jake replied. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness. In the months that followed, New Montana became a training center for other worlds facing the harvester threat. Dragons and humans worked together to teach the biotechnology and tactics that had saved their planet. The network of cooperation spread from system to system, creating an alliance that the harvesters had never encountered before. Jake Morrison, who had once lived alone on a frontier ranch, found himself at the center of a galactic community. His cattle still grazed in the purple grass, but now they shared the pastures with dragon young who were learning to work with human partners. The harvesters would return eventually, as they always did. But when they came, they would find not isolated worlds fighting alone, but a galaxy united in its determination to survive. The fire that burned in impossible places had spread to 1,000 worlds, and it would not be easily extinguished. On quiet evenings, Jake would sit on his porch with Ember and watch the stars. Somewhere out there, other farmers and other dragons were building the same kind of partnerships that had saved New Montana. The loneliness of the frontier had given way to something far greater, a community that spanned the galaxy, united by the simple understanding that some things are worth fighting for together.